My article in this month's issue of Science of Rowing reviews a 2021 study on premenopausal well-trained participants versus postmenopausal well-trained participants. And briefly, the researchers found that both groups experienced similar average muscle damage from an eccentric squat protocol. And this suggests that training experience may have a greater influence over exercise response than hormonal status alone, and that strength training can still be effective for postmenopausal athletes. This study is a significant advancement into well-trained participants as opposed to the bulk of the rest of the research being on sedentary or untrained participants. So I'll leave that there for now. You can read the details and further takeaways from that study by joining our membership or reading the original article linked below. Now we have Masters rowing coach Marlene Royle here to discuss her experiences as an athlete and coach around the menopausal transition into postmenopausal life. So Marlene, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Will, and hello to the Science of Rowing audience. Nice to be here.
Really happy to have you here to discuss this. The whole perimenopausal, postmenopausal area is a real growing area of interest for researchers and coaches as more masters athletes and more female athletes in particular participate in sport. So what are some of your experiences with this developmental transition personally and or in coaching?
I think one of the biggest things that hit women when they hit the point of menopause or are approaching that point is just, for some women, because everybody reacts to this stage of life so differently, and some women have incredible disruptions to their training lifestyle because of so many hormonal swings, mood swings, changes. They live on a daily roller coaster, so to speak, and those, depending on what kind of symptoms, they may look towards some types of hormone replacement or some natural adaptogens that can help kind of stabilize their body through this. Other women just cruise right through it and like, oh, what's a hot flash? I don't even know what that is. And then other women will say, well, what do you do when you're in the middle of a 2K erg test and you start having a hot flash? I'm like, well, I don't know. That's a good question. Let's talk about it. What do you do? And so you're dealing with looking at everybody's circumstance a little bit differently because some women might have 100 hot flashes a day, right? I mean, that's like, whew. Other women don't experience this. They experience a little bit. So it's a very fluid situation, and I think as we learn more, which we're going to talk about in the study, we're learning how we can mitigate some of the stress on the body, how training can help stabilize some of these swings, how we can address the things that we lose because of the estrogen and the testosterone drop off, so that that's going to affect the muscle synthesis. So I think the more I learn about it, the more I'm starting to understand, okay, I can tweak my training programs this way. I can combine sessions back-to-back style or within a session to give the best benefit, because sometimes less training gives you better gains, and that's what I'm finding out. It's not all, the thing with rowers is they love the volume, they love to row, so you've got to push them sometimes to get this other type of work done that is going to support what happens with all the fluctuations in the hormones levels and the hormones that drop off.
It sounds like a lot of that is individualized, kind of based on the athlete's feedback and based on their own experience, that we can have this broad base of knowledge of here's generally what happens with the hormones and the symptoms and the side effects and all of this. But that might be totally different from one athlete to another. So if you're getting that feedback as a coach, then you have all these different tools that you can use to get the best outcomes for them.
Yeah, and I think giving athletes the permission to adjust according to how they feel. Like we've talked about the rate of perceived exertion scale, because quite frankly, one day you might feel really good and you just want to let's go crank. Another day you might feel like crap, but you've got to do something. because the consistency is really, really key. The consistency to training, the consistency to the strength work. So I think it's important from a coaching point of view and an educator point of view to give people permission to make decisions based on how they're feeling, and let them know that, it's okay to scale back, but just try to be consistent. So that knowledge alone gives our women athletes, it gives them some tools that they don't have to feel guilty that, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do this exactly maybe the way it should do, but I just don't feel like I just can't handle it today. So I think that kind of education of helping people make good training decisions on a daily basis really, really helps. And that's what a lot of this information is helping me with.
And based too on the physiological grounding of here's what's going on in your body, and here's how this might affect it on training is an empowering message to, this isn't just you. And I work with rowers who say, well, I feel like I'm being a wimp. I said, well, your physiological environment is totally determining this, and we've got to respond and train appropriately for that.
Right. And it is unpredictable to a certain degree. Again, as I said, there are people who have very stable physiologies, and they just, like I could say, I've never had a headache in my life. They're just those people. And there are people with migraines, once a week, so there's such a range of people. But when they understand why some of this is happening, and again, put it in a team perspective too, like maybe you feel great and your doubles partner really doesn't, she's not being a wimp. It's just what's going on that day. Or, your boat feels great one day, your 8 feels great one day, feels like you're rowing in mud the next day. Okay, there might be things going on. So they've got to have the permission to be flexible. And I think the more they tune in to what's going on, and they maybe keep track of something like their heart rate variability for recovery and nervous system stress, those types of things can say, look, you really do need to take it easy today. Go do something, but just don't go over the top.
Here's the options for plan A, plan B, plan C, depending on how you're training.
Exactly.
So in effort to kind of improve that education and mobilization of resources, you've recently completed an online education course on training for the menopausal athlete. What did you learn? What was reinforced for you, and what maybe challenged any of your current practices?
Well, this course was given by Dr. Stacy Sims, and she is a scientist. She's an American, and she actually rowed in university, so she does have a rowing background, though she's now more into triathlon and cycling, but she's a like a hardcore training endurance athlete herself. And she's actually one of the first women to study women's physiology and fitness and nutrition, because most of the studies that are out there that we get information on are mostly it's men who are being studied, because women are fluctuating all the time. So that makes research really difficult, and men are, more stable from this point of view. So she's the first person who really started digging into this. And, she has one course called Women Are Not Small Men. I haven't taken that one yet, but, she talks about the differences of what affects women, how the menstrual cycle works. On YouTube, she's got some very good discussions if people want to listen to more, like as she really gets into it, because there's a lot of science in it. But this course, she gave a really good overview of exactly what is menopause, what happens before, what happens after. What was interesting to me, she also went into kind of just the physiological basis of it. She went into what can you do about it, like when there are all these hormone fluctuations. I mean, one day one woman, a woman might want to kill somebody. The next day she probably can't stay awake, and then she thinks, oh my God, what's wrong with me? And there's all kinds of mental issues too, because it can trigger depression, and these are all the hormonal levels giving mixed signals. So one of the takeaways that I thought was very interesting was how important it is, like your number one goal is to mitigate stress, bring down the stress level in the body. And this is also really connected to the body composition changes, because when certain hormones drop off, the body's triggered to store fat. So one of her the big emphasis she has is that, first of all, to stop storing so much fat, you've got to keep your cortisol levels down. Absolutely, like number one priority, because your cortisol, your stress hormone, it triggers your body to hold fat. So those are things like, she really digs into like your nutrition, your timing around eating, because exercise is a stress. Maybe it's a positive stress, but it is a stress. So we're talking about positive and negative stresses. So timing of protein intake and food before and after training, really, really major, for bringing down the stress level, especially eating, taking in some calories right after eating, how important that is to bring down the cortisol level. I thought that this was very interesting to me. She talks a lot about how vitamin D works in the body. So the vitamin D with the calorie intake right after training brings down the stress level. She goes a lot, I mean, she talks a lot about lifestyle issues, the importance of sleep, proper nutrition, huge emphasis on adequate protein. And she really, she really emphasizes a higher protein need than obviously what the average daily requirements are, because you have to train what you lose. What are you losing? You're losing protein synthesis, you're losing muscle strength. So you've got to like inject these things, you've got to train for what you're losing the most, which is strength, and neuromuscular connections and activity in mitochondria. So that whole aspect of it I thought was quite interesting. So, big emphasis on nutrition. She talks a lot about the importance of gut health, and your gut health has a tremendous influence on how your body manages the hormones. So if your gut environment is unhealthy, you're going to have a much harder time post-menopause dealing with the hormones, because that's where the hormones are regulated, and the gut health helps eliminate excess hormones that you don't want swimming around in your body, so to speak. I thought that was quite fascinating, because I would have never thought of that. So your gut health is so connected to maintaining a stable hormonal balance. So that's an easy thing people can do, right? Pay attention to how you eat and improve your quality of your diet. So all of those things were kind of connected to bringing down, keeping the stress levels on the body down, or when you induce a stress level, like exercising, that you do something right away to recover from it and bring it down the right way, because keeping the cortisol levels low are helping your body not store some of that additional fat. So that was a whole interesting, it's a very sciencey course. There's she's really detailed about stuff. But that's exactly what I wanted out of the course.
Because that's kind of the role of the coach, right? Is to take all that information, synthesize it, and then help the athlete put it into practice. They might not need to know everything about the different hormonal levels and nutritional stuff, but you can help them say, hey, this is important, and here's what you can do about it.
Absolutely. And I have to say, honestly, I'm 58, so I've experienced a lot of these changes as well. In my own situation, I'm one of those people that's just like super stable. Like I practically didn't even notice anything. So I have to get my information sort of from other women who
Sure.
are just like, oh my God, I thought I was going to kill somebody today. I'm like,
Yeah, or just that
why?
individualized
Okay, well,
response
yeah,
that the average
exactly.
is here, and we can have people over
Yeah,
here or over there.
yeah. So it's, so communication is really important. What I thought was very interesting, and so she does a real deep dive into the nutrition part of things. what the key focus was for me is I wanted to know, okay, how do I take this information and put it into practice? So the whole training portion of the course included real deep dives into high intensity exercise, plyometrics, and strength training. And she has a course that's called Lift Heavy Shit. Okay, that's one of her courses. But she really, it gave me a lot of hope. That's what I'm going to say. Like that you don't have to settle for this menopause, right? You don't have to settle for the extra 10 pounds. That is not a given. It's not automatic. And there's stuff you can do to mitigate that. So starting early, basically if you're in a good habit from strength training, say from university, and then you go on and you continue rowing in your 20s into your 30s, keep up the strength. If you're in your 40s, if you're before that point, get the strength in there. Start working on that stuff now. So the interesting takeaways for me were and what gave me hope was the combination of high intensity training, the plyometric, and the strength work. And she explains how all of that really stimulates the muscle synthesis and the bone density and the neurochemical transmitters to basically, let's keep our coordination in really good shape. And she teaches you a lot about how to combine workouts, how to combine back-to-back days, how to combine strength work and plyometric work within a session. So those are the things that I took away that I'm like directly putting into the programs that I create.
One of the things that you and I talked about too was that it's changing the culture, changing the expectations for masters rowers, and the idea that perimenopausal and postmenopausal people can still be athletes, can still gain from strength training, can still do this higher intensity athletic training, that we don't need to settle for what is commonly marketed to endurance athletes and to female athletes in particular, is this isolation exercises, low load strength training, very high repetitions, and kind of this like protectiveness sort of element, and really this is saying no, we need to keep this hard charging, hard training elements still in people's lives.
Yes, and I mean what your level is might change according to your ability or your age, but what you do is still the same. So
right. And the effort,
so the emphasis is build strength. Okay, so we want to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible for that contraction. She says, no hypertrophy, throw it out the window. At your age, you need to focus on strength. And so that also goes along with, when we were training as lightweight women and we didn't want to gain muscle bulk, that's what we did. We did low reps and high loads, and you increase that ability to create more tension.
The neural drive, the neural connectivity, and then I think also that athleticism element, that if you're doing the plyometric exercises or the single limb exercises, cross body coordination, we're strengthening all of those neural connections from central nervous system to peripheral nervous system and muscles in a way that a single joint, low load, lower strain exercise isn't.
Absolutely. And putting in multi-directional things too. Mm-hmm. That's where the plyometric fits in really well, because rowers are linear people, mm-hmm. right? Except for if we're sculling and we're opening and closing our handles, things are pretty linear. So I think especially for women in rowing, the plyometrics becomes really good for stimulating the bone mineral density, but also you've got to, in order to do that, you've got to put forces on your bones that are coming in different directions. So I think the plyometrics is a beautiful addition to that.
So let's get into some more of those training takeaways then, because you coach many masters rowers of all ages, types, and levels. So what are some of those key points for Royal rowers during the menopausal transition?
Getting the message so they really understand to be do your strength training. Okay. That's the one aspect. Do it. Okay. If rowers love to row, so what do they want to do? They want to row. Sometimes, I mean, there are those people who like embrace the strength work. I mean, I always loved the strength work personally. But there are people who just don't like it. It's like medicine. I said, perhaps it is. And this is your prescription. Here you go. Just, do it.
And I will say that the dosage that we're prescribing here is twice a week, 60 to 75 minutes tops.
Yeah. And
because we're doing that hard, high intensity,
right,
get in, get it done, and then move on from there. I think sometimes people set up this, well, I have to do 4 times a week and I have to do this and that, and a much greater load than what people actually need.
exactly. So, I mean, it really can be fit well into a training program. So when you look at somebody's overall schedule, I mean, some people have more time and more facilities than others. If I can, on a strength day, I will usually give them the option of doing an aerobic session. If they're limited in time, I would rather have 2 days a week. I would rather have that strength option in there to be the priority for that day. Some people want to row that day or do something else, so then we can combine that. Helping people manage what they can do. I mean, especially during this COVID period of time when people had to shift to home, advising them what kind of equipment to get some kettlebells. You've got a really good article on the Rowing Stronger website about setting up a home gym. So I've stolen some ideas from there. But helping them manage with what they have. And, what a 72-year-old woman who's never done strength training before can do compared to a 45-year-old woman who's, really going for it. You've got to just, you've got to find what can we do for them, how they can take the program, how we can make it work as much as possible to get things as heavy as they can, because again, lifting home, you might not be able to get those huge loads, but you can usually do still some pretty good work. So I do spend a lot of time helping people figure out what they can do at home and how they can adapt with what they have if they can't go to their gym.
Because there's modifications to the equipment, there's modifications to the exercise too. I coach someone, for example, who only has a pair of up to 50-pound adjustable dumbbells.
Mm-hmm.
So she's about at the point where for a goblet squat, 50 pounds is not challenging enough anymore for sets under 8 reps.
Mm-hmm.
So we started doing the paused goblet squat. So you go down to the bottom position, pause there for a 1-second count. And then we're working to overcome that lack of a stretch reflex out of the bottom. We're working on more explosiveness from that position. And it sort of resets. It's giving us an extra 10 pounds of room to progress on the exercise. There's a lot of ways that we can change the exercise too, to make it more challenging and emphasize that neural connection, higher loading.
Exactly. And like this study talks about starting to utilize the eccentric component is something that I haven't experimented with yet, but since I consult on a very regular basis with Will for my strength program for my row athletes, that's probably something we have started incorporating some plyometric stuff. We'll probably go to experiment with this because it's a great way to build strength. It does induce some muscle soreness. Eccentric contractions tend to do this, but you can also make some very, very good gains. And that's another way that you can modify your exercises if you don't have a lot of just iron, big, heavy iron. You start slowing down those recovery phases. You start slowing down those stretch phases, lengthening phases. And I think you can get some really good gains out of that. And
then I think part of that too is not everybody needs to do everything all at the same time. So if you have somebody who's new to strength training at 55, then they're going to be doing this, more conservative. Let's start with just building the fundamental movements. If you have somebody who's been strength training since their collegiate days and they've kept it up for 20 or 30 years, then yeah, we need that next level for more challenge on the athlete. But I think that only happens if, coming back to your earlier statement about having hope and changing the culture of it, that we're still thinking about this age demographic as athletes, and that we're still trying to provide those challenges and encouraging them to seek that element of training out.
Exactly. Well, and one of the points that gave me good hope for people who, especially, women are very concerned about their body composition. The competitive rowers, they're concerned about their body composition and their performance. And one thing that was a new kind of just putting two pieces together was when Stacy Sims talked about the mechanisms of high intensity training, meaning that training of like, could be up to 90 seconds, but let's say like 30, 40, 30 seconds, 30 seconds or less. And she talks about this quite a bit. And I guess one of the things I found quite interesting here was that when you do that type of training, you just empty all your glycogen. And for postmenopausal women, okay, you empty all your carbohydrate, use up all that carbohydrate store in this high intensity workout. During the recovery phase, your body metabolizes fat. And so I thought that that was a really important piece of information that you can tell athletes to say, I mean, some people like that type of training, some people don't. Depends a little bit on your physiology, but that's one of the reasons that it's important for older athletes, is particularly women. Women are fat burning machines by nature. Okay, they don't need the miles and miles and miles of endurance training to develop a fat burning capability the way that men do, because women already have it. However, the training intensity is one of the things that helps you manage the body composition, because you've got to stimulate the body to burn fat, and it's not going to do it. It'll do it more efficiently if you've burned up all your carbohydrate in that high intensity workout, which also doesn't take a lot of time, right? You need 30, 40 minutes. During the week, she really emphasizes hit it hard and fast and heavy during the week. Do your long stuff on the weekend, because we know you won't be happy if you don't go out and do your long stuff. But I thought this was something I was like, wow, that can really give people some hope when they just feel like their bodies are starting to get a little bit out of control, that understanding how to manipulate what energy sources you're using, what triggers what, how to eat properly around training, actually gives you a really, really good amount of information.
I think that comes back to the neural coordination and general athletic coordination too. The rowing fast, high paces, high stroke rates, under 30 seconds of maximal output is athletically challenging in terms of having to get catch slide timing and body sequencing and the recovery and all of this stuff together. In my experience, when masters athletes go away from that kind of training for several months on end, coming back to it for race prep is really, really challenging. So I always try to keep one of those true high intensity training days in. And I think you've added the physiological and body composition kind of layer to that, but from the sport performance perspective too, staying in touch with those high intensities is really important, especially if you're racing 1Ks.
Yes, and for longevity. I mean, if people are interested in following, one of the top longevity scientists, follow David Sinclair, who's a Harvard professor. And one of his key takeaways is you've got to be out of breath regularly. You've got to be, you've got to push yourself to that point that you're breathless. And that is going to keep your body, you've got to run from the saber-toothed tiger, right? But that stimulates all of these survival mechanisms in your cells to, I've got to stay awake. I've got to stay on top of things. I've got to know what I'm doing. I've got to keep those mitochondria happy so that I can react. So that's another, fits right into the longevity science as well, which I thought was really cool.
And I think coming back to what you said earlier about, training the quality that you're losing, masters rowers compete in a challenging environment for that, because Masters Nationals in the United States is in August. You're racing 1Ks. It's hot. The duration is sprint. The intensity is high. And at the same time, we have age-related losses in maximal strength, power, ability to regulate body temperature. And then we say, okay, here we're going to go compete in this environment. So if we're not training for some of those things, again, really hard to come back to that in your race prep time.
Exactly. And I would say, as much as there's always grumbling about we're older, we should be doing longer, we should only be doing head races, we should be doing longer events, why are we racing 1K? I don't quite know how it became 1K. I have a simple hypothesis that it was quite by chance, and probably in Europe they were looking for lakes where they could have more races, and there were probably more lakes that offered 1,000-meter courses than 2,000-meter courses. This is totally my hypothesis, but this is what I think. However, racing 1K is better for you from the longevity standpoint, from the body composition standpoint, and the training that you do to race 1K is actually really beneficial for you from a longevity point of view.
Sure.
So,
I think in the sense, if it encourages you to do that kind of training year round, if we're thinking about keeping those elements in the year-round training picture.
Yes, and you know, and with people who I have tracked, say for 20 years, doing their 2Ks, if they stay on top of things, you know, their 2K ergs don't decline until they really get like to 70. And then I start seeing the declines, and I'm seeing more and more that the people who are continuing to be serious about their strength training, continuing to be serious about maintaining that bit of interval work all year round, you know, they're now getting into their mid 70s, and you know what, their speeds aren't dropping off all that much, and some of them are even gaining because it's stuff that they didn't do when they were younger. So that's interesting for the athletes who say I've been working with for 15 or 20 years now, because I'm seeing them, you know, I'm seeing them go from 50 and now they're in their mid 70s, right? So that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple other success stories just before we hit the record button on this episode. So tell us about a couple of those examples.
Well, there are two women who I worked with who were single scullers for the head of the Charles in the senior masters group, so in the 50-year-old group. And both of them have won the head of the Charles in their single. And there was definitely a difference in their ability to maintain their high status in their age group over the years as they got into the second half of the group, because in the 50-year-old group is 50 to 59. Okay, once you get to 60, they go down into 5-year age groups. It's a little bit different. So you know, when you're 50 and now you're 59 and you're racing against the 50-year-olds, when they started to be much more regular about their strength training and stay in touch with that on a constant basis, they were definitely able to maintain those high positions, say that those top 5 positions for many years, you know, and sometimes to win again at 58 or 59 in a 50-year-old group. So, you know, besides learning how to row better over time and not giving up on that, you know, technique is important here, and adding in the strength training, I do think made a big difference, helping those 50, 60-year-olds maintain those, who are at those high competitive levels, maintain their positions, and the other ones keep coming up. So
great. I think that this has been motivational and informational for people. So let's conclude there. And where could people find more from you? Because there's a lot more Marlene Royle out there for people who want
yes.
more.
Well, my personal coaching practice is Royal Row performance training programs, and so that's where, you know, I'm working really closely individuals with either individuals or some teams, and my website there is royalrow.com. And I also am partnered with Rebecca Caro, and we have a business called Faster Masters Rowing, and our sole focus is educational webinars for masters and masters topics. And we also have a membership program which includes training and technique and performance, and it's got, you know, 6 or 7 modules in it that we update each month and train for different events and also work on developing technique. And, it's really education, but also training based as well. And the website is fastermastersrowing.com.
Links to all of that in the comments or in the video description section below. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.